It was a humid Sunday in December 1967, and Harold Holt, the 17th Prime Minister of Australia, was standing on Cheviot Beach, the midday sun beating down upon him. His neighbour, and the woman he's having an affair with, Marjorie Gillespie, watched as Harry changed into his swim trunks. Marjorie was not interested in joining him, the water looking a little rough. But Harold claimed to know this beach like the back of his hand. He'd spearfished in it many times. Harold confidently swam out. Then a colossal wave came up and he went under. He was never seen again. His nickname at school is, wait for it, Puss.
No one gets that nickname now.
So just to reiterate, Harry's dad marries Harry's girlfriend.
What kind of warped, inverted Oedipal conflict
Yep.
is this?
Hello, I'm Leigh Boucher.
And I'm Alecia Simmons, and this is The Dead Can't Sue.
This week, Alecia, I've begun with the beach and the drowning because it's what Harold Holt is best remembered for. It doesn't help that in Melbourne there's that swimming pool named in his honour. Yes, it's called the Harold Holt Memorial Swimming Centre.
Oh, that's just wrong, isn't it? It's like he's become sort of more of a punchline.
Yeah, and
You know.
honestly, I think his disappearance and death are probably the least interesting things about his life. I want to argue that Harold is a bridge between a conservative mid-20th century Australia and what we understand as the kind of modernising tumult and excitement of the 1970s. And his life and political history reveals, I think really interestingly, that the Liberal Party that Harold Holt led when he became Prime Minister was a very different beast to the party of Angus Taylor and Tony Abbott.
Less a beast at all.
Yes, exactly,
You know,
and more a
yeah.
kind of capacious political philosophy that could house a
Sure.
bit of difference within it. Plus, he had kind of an interesting and kind of complex relationship with his wife Zara. His first two kids were born to Zara while she was married to someone else.
Swinging 60s.
Exactly.
Fun.
Don't get me started. Once again, I'm obsessed on his complex relationship with his father.
Oh, I do like that, Leigh. I mean, I just think that all good history is really psychoanalysis in disguise
Yep.
in some ways.
So he's born in 1908 in Sydney. His father, Tom, is a school teacher, so he's not from privilege.
Yep.
And his father ends up kind of working, sort of dabbling in owning and running some pubs and becoming eventually a travelling theatrical manager. The Holt's financial position actually starts to improve a little bit, which also coincides with the parents' divorce.
Sure. And this is, can I just ask, this is the 1920s?
Yes, that's right.
Is it? And so getting a divorce then would have actually still been quite scandalous.
Yeah, it's a big
that's
deal.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's partly the reason why Harry asks his father to enrol the boys at Wesley in Melbourne. His dad's going to go to London. He knows his dad's going to go to London. He knows his dad's going to enrol him in a private school, he and his brother, and he says, can you send us to Wesley? Biographers talk about him finding kind of solace and security at this school. He thrives there, actually.
Interesting. So lacking the kind of solid parental family structure, he instead turns to the institution
Exactly.
and finds a home.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Wesley is a private school that emphasises kind of community service and it has an
Sure.
ideal of what it calls practical divinity.
Perfect training for a future politician.
Exactly. And his nickname at school is, wait for it, Puss.
No one gets that nickname now, Leigh.
They're calling him Puss because he has the charm of a cat.
Oh.
So, imagine
Okay.
a young 14-year-old who's charming, a little bit feline.
So it sounds like what? He's a jock and he's also clever.
Yep.
And he's good looking.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
So he lands a scholarship to the University of Melbourne.
Yeah.
50% of the scholarship is for character and athleticism.
Oh, embarrassing.
Yep. So he's not, he's not there on academic merit alone. So it's at uni that Harry meets Zara Dickens. She's the daughter of a wealthy businessman with great energy and style. She's from exactly that Wesley world of privilege and security.
Right.
That he is only precariously accessing. So Harry's already considering by this point a life in politics, and he and Zara spend a lot of time talking about politics, about government. Zara thinks that governments should intervene into the economy to provide kind of base level support to those who are in need. Remember, it's the 30s. They're coming off the back of World War One. There's a lot of people in poverty. There's a lot of disruption.
It's the Depression, right?
Yeah.
29 to 31.
Yeah. But Harry thinks this sounds like socialism. Right?
Boogie boogie.
Yeah, so he's still a Wesley boy, right?
Yeah,
He's already what we would call a liberal, in the sense that it is up to the individual to work harder to ameliorate the conditions of their life. So Zara describes their early relationship as full of jealousies and arguments. She notes that they had completely different personalities and outlooks. Those are her words. Harry's very organised and strong-minded, tidy and hardworking, while I was vague, dreamy, always running behind time and away with the pixies.
Oh, so much fun, Zara.
Yeah, and also she can afford to be away with the pixies.
Of course, of course.
They're dating for a little bit. It's a little bit on and off. It's a little bit uni romance. They do plan to marry, and then Zara comes into some money after an early venture into fashion business. And that produces what she describes as a violent row, where he calls off the wedding because he can't match her in terms of income and assets, and says, until I can support you, we can't get married.
Okay, so that reads to me like quite clearly a huge threat to his masculinity,
Yep.
in a way that is actually understandable at the time, in that masculinity is defined in legislation at this time. If you think about the Harvester judgment, it's defined there as your capacity, or the capacity of a breadwinner man to support a wife and 3 children, and your wage is premised on that.
Yep.
So it comes to be defined around this. So I could see, I mean, I don't forgive him for it, but I could see why he would be threatened by that.
And he's 21,
yeah.
right? So just remember, he's 21, 22.
Sure.
So I probably said some stuff when I was 21 and 22 that didn't have the best gender politics. So she basically says, stuff you, okay? And she uses that money to go on a cruise where she meets a handsome British colonial officer from India who she falls for, marries, and then goes off to India to be his wife.
Wow, that's more befitting a Zara.
Well, it doesn't go well, though,
Right.
unfortunately, because she actually finds the racial dynamics and caste politics of India incredibly confronting. So Holt says he's devastated, but he's also got his own irons in the fire. He's already, in fact, starting to have a little fling with a girl named Lola Thring.
Is that real? Did you make that name up?
No, but I've been looking forward
Did
to
you get
saying
it from a Nabokov novel?
Well, speaking of
Little
Nabokov, a short while later, his dad, Harry's dad, who's come back from London, marries Lola.
No.
So just to reiterate, Harry's dad marries Harry's girlfriend.
What kind of warped, inverted Oedipal conflict
Yep.
is this?
And this period of life is written up as like, you know, struggling with Zara, who chooses another man, struggling because Lola marries his dad. Still weird.
Oh, God, we could talk about Lola Thring for a long time, but tell me, how does Harry end up in Parliament?
Right. So he graduates from Melbourne University in 1930, which is a bad time to be on the job market. Depression.
Depression?
He planned on becoming a barrister, but works a bit thin on the ground. He sets up basically a house or shares a flat with his mate, Johnny Bust, but ends up having to move into a boarding house because he can't afford the rent.
So this is the precarious privilege again, isn't it?
Yeah. He joins the Young Nationalists, which is a kind of conservative nationalist party in 1934. He's 26 at that point, and he runs that year for a seat in the lower house in federal parliament for the United Australia Party.
So I'm assuming this is not Clive Palmer.
No. Well,
Tell me about politics at that time.
yeah, so I think one of the things to think about politics in Australia in the first 3-4 decades of the 20th century is the stabilising force is the ALP, against which other parties are forming and reforming, right? So what we now call the Liberal Party does not exist yet. There are precursors to it in terms of liberalism, in terms of nationalism, but there's no coherent counterpoint to the Labor Party. So he loses his first campaign for federal parliament. He's running in a safe Labor seat. It's actually the classic story. This still exists today. You go and run in a guaranteed to lose seat, prove your worth and merit, and then get given a safe seat.
Cut your teeth.
So he cuts his teeth as a loser twice, and then is elected in a by-election in a safe United Australia Party seat in 1935 when he's 27.
Oh my God. Okay, so by today's standards, that seems absurdly young, and I cannot imagine an electorate trusting
Yep.
a 27-year-old. Is this normal at the time?
No, absolutely not.
Right.
You know, and his first speech, his main speech, nicely captures his politics. He focuses on youth unemployment, the importance of physical fitness for military recruitment, and he claims that young, educated men, who is the constituency he's saying that he speaks for, note, he's 27, he's saying, I speak for young 27-year-old men. He claims that these men don't want to break with empire. Australia's got a duty to stand by Britain at all times. And he thought that unemployed men should be forced into work and technical training so they might learn industrious habits.
Wow. He's a moralist.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and he's got no truck with a kind of socialist or left reading that the Depression might have been structural. He thinks the answer to these kind of problems is disciplining the bodies and minds of these young men into being capable individuals who will go and get jobs and look after themselves. Harry, as you can probably imagine, actually, he thrives in Canberra because Canberra
Boring.
Don't bag Canberra. I love Canberra. Maybe I'm boring. I don't know. And he's described at the time in the press as the Parliament's most eligible bachelor.
Hot.
Yeah, and I think it's both interesting that he's described that way. What I find equally interesting is that he clearly likes it.
Yeah. But he also continues to like it clearly throughout the rest of his life.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think about Harold Holt, I think of that iconic image of him in his bathers, surrounded by young women, and the contrast between that and Menzies.
Yeah.
You know, Menzies, who you would never see in anything other than a suit.
Yes.
Like it's modern and it's the Australia that came before that.
Yeah,
you know?
and that's he's going to create a political identity in exactly the terms you are describing, and we can see it being put together in these early years of his political career. In 1939, Harry becomes a government minister in the first government of Robert Menzies, making him the youngest man ever to hold ministerial office in Parliament. He's not on the front bench for long because in 1940, remember, the war's broken out in 39, earlier in Asia. He enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force to fight the war. That doesn't last long either. So he thinks he's going to go off and fight and then doesn't.
Because he wants to fight too, doesn't he? He's a nationalist.
Yeah. And he's then given the Labor and National Service portfolio, where he introduces, I think, the thing I've become most fascinated with in Harry's early life anyway, which is that he introduces or is the face of child endowment, which basically is the government giving mothers specifically 5 shillings a week for every child except their first child.
Which we today would probably dismiss as a kind of baby bonus, right? Like that's how we understand it.
Yeah, and it is a little bit of a baby bonus. Harry has been worried about declining birth rates. This is the Australia of the White Australia policy. There's a tremendous anxiety about making sure this continent is filled with white babies. At the same time, though, this has been a piece of social security, what we would call social security legislation, that feminists in Australia have been campaigning for 40 years at this point.
Yeah, campaigning for alongside a whole range of other, what a historian Marilyn Lake calls maternalist politics.
Yeah.
And I find it really interesting because it is one of those things that you could so easily dismiss, and yet really when we're talking about Australia's, the history of Australian welfare, you track it back to this period and to these efforts on the part of feminists to intercede in many ways between them and their husbands to kind of say, and it's a protectionist politics.
Yeah, so that Royal Commission, the majority report of that commission says the notion of child endowment should be avoided because it would produce a revolution in the family. That would give that mother too much independence and she might then flee the family. So it's seen as something that might disrupt family life.
Yeah.
And feminist campaigning, and also it's become part of Labor Party policy by the mid-30s, has changed the meaning of child endowment so that by 1941, someone like Harold Holt can be the face of child endowment.
Well, they support child endowment and they don't support the motherhood endowment, which I think is interesting.
So what's amazing, that's probably putting it too generously, but what's interesting here is that it's not means tested.
Yeah.
It's not restricted by race.
It's universal.
Yeah, it's universal, which is quite a kind of radical intervention. And some historians of the left would say the reason Harold Holt puts this up is because there's contests over the basic wage going on, and this is a sop to the Labor Party to try and get them to stop campaigning for an increase in wages during the war. So this promising parliamentary career is brought to an abrupt interruption when Menzies is first rolled as PM and then loses, and then the UAP loses the next election in 1941 and the ALP is elected, and then the governments of Chifley and Curtin follow. Right. It's not until Menzies is re-elected in 1949 that Holt is back in the corridors of power, back being a government minister, and he is given by Robert Menzies probably two of the thorniest issues of the 1950s, which is immigration and industrial relations.
So with the first, you're looking at the White Australia policy, obviously, and from what I understand of Harold Holt, it's that he starts to modernise in some ways. He actually starts to shift, or to roll it back, to unpick it.
Yeah, you start to see the seeds of that mode of thinking, which really shape his prime ministership when he is the immigration minister.
Right.
So he's also, he's also Minister for Industrial Relations in this period. Again, a conciliatory kind of figure. He has a great relationship with the head of the ACTU, quite unusual for a Liberal politician. There is some very big industrial conflict in the 50s, don't get me wrong. He threatens to bring in the army. He threatens to break strikes on the wharves. Like, he's not like a softy, lovely accord politics guy of the 80s. He's definitely still a Liberal. He's definitely still deeply suspicious of union power and particularly of communist influence in the unions. But he is most interested in finding ways to agree. And so he works really closely with his counterpart in the ACTU and says basically, funnel all union activities and negotiations through a central figure so that I can talk directly to them and we will figure out a way through these industrial conflicts. And strike rates gradually go down over the course of the decade. So I think both left and right political historians don't love him, but I think that's because he's trying to beat a kind of middle-ish path through these two different ways of understanding Australian industrial relations.
And that sort of seems to chime in with his personality as well. Like, he's someone who's sort of beloved by all.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So he then becomes treasurer, which is a massive fail. He's terrible at it.
Oh dear.
He makes a few big errors of judgment as treasurer. Menzies has to step in and overturn one of his policies. It's quite a humiliating kind of experience for him. But it's lucky he's face planting, but he has Zara by his side to make him feel better.
Zara? When did she come back from India? What?
So actually, she's been there the whole time. I was kind of keeping her quiet off the side.
So sexist of you, Leigh.
No, actually, it's because I wanted to finish the episode with who I care about, which
good.
is Zara. So back in 1938, Zara had returned to Australia and kicked things off again with Harry. She's still married to someone else, to her first husband. She had twin boys in 1939. And a later biographer reveals that they're actually Harry's children. And that's revealed in 2005, although widely understood in their world and actually in the Canberra political bubble. One of the kids looks really like Harry. It's kind of...
quite good looking.
Yeah. So a big part of the Harold Holt story, I think, is that he has two children with somebody else's wife, then marries her and she's divorced, and nobody reports on any questions about their relationship, any questions about their children. There is an agreement from the Australian press that they do not report or intervene on the scandalous lives of Australian politicians, or at least on the lives of men. And Harold is able to make his way in Parliament because everyone agrees not to talk about it. So the next couple of years they're carrying on together. By the early 40s, she's secured a divorce. And in 1946, when Harold's dad dies, he then marries Zara. And they kind of, when they get married, Harry says to her, just know you will always come second to my political career.
Oh, that's romantic. Did he write that in a card?
Yeah.
That's really nice.
I kind of love the upfrontery of it. This is what you're signing up for. You know, I'm a politician. You are signing up to be a political wife.
But it sounds like she's got her own thing going on anyway with her clothing.
Yeah. They are a very successful political couple. They're travelling a lot, going overseas. They're having a pretty good time. She's got quite a successful career as a designer and an owner of a chain of dress shops, not the Zara we know today. But she's got her own thing going on. She's charming, funny, entertaining, charismatic. They're a bit of a power couple.
Kind of Bill and Hillary.
Yeah. With similarly juicy, loosey-goosey kind of sexual relationship. But they also travel, and this is, you know, a bit of a little factoid about his life I find really fascinating. They go every year to northern Queensland where they have a holiday house in Bingle Bay, which they can only afford because of Zara's financial success. Just
FYI. I can't believe he had fights with her about that when she first announced it.
Like, dude, you're going to get a holiday house in North Queensland. Calm down. And they're spending time up there because Harold's old friend, the artist and environmentalist John Bust, is there. He's been there the whole way through. Yeah, and so he's got these school friends, and this is one of them. But they go up to their holiday house at here, and this is where Harry's love of the water is really clear. He gets into the ocean.
Oh, no.
He gets into the ocean at every available opportunity. On more than one occasion, Zara and John are screaming at him to get back in the boat because there's sharks around. And he's like, I'm fine. So he's got a little, you know what? He's a little cocky.
Yeah.
Right?
Showing off, absolutely.
And he thinks that when he's in the water, he's going to be able to handle whatever threats the ocean throws his way.
The other thing that I've heard about Harold is that he's not actually that great a swimmer.
No.
He's not a particularly strong swimmer. No. He's a good diver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe when you're in the calm waters of northern Queensland, spearfishing in the reef, you know, that's fine. But off Cheviot Beach and those waves, he's going to run afoul. But we'll get to that later.
A clap of thunder sounds in the distance. Hark!
So the Sydney Morning Herald announced in January 1966 that the patriarch has relinquished his power. And PM Robert Menzies was resigning after 16 years as Prime Minister. The SMH went on, Mr. Holt now, at last, gets his chance to show his mettle. And Harry was quite proud of the fact that he didn't have to step over the dead bodies of his political opponents to become Prime Minister. He was really proud of the fact that he didn't have to contest the leadership and that this was a kind of peaceful transition.
It's interesting that Menzies had decided earlier, right, precisely when he would resign. You know, not many prime ministers, certainly these days, do that.
Yep.
And I guess by the time that he did resign, he was seen as a little fusty, right? A little out of date.
Yeah,
Is that right?
That's definitely right.
Yeah.
You know, and that's in sharp contrast to Harry, who's fit. He's being photographed alongside his daughters-in-law who were wearing bikinis. He goes spearfishing, he's in wetsuits. Some even compare him to 007. He's getting the reflected glory of the young people he's being photographed with. If you look at him, he's, you know, pretty grey-haired.
Is that so?
Yeah, he's not looking as young, but he's seen as young.
Right.
He's seen as young. He still has that reputation for being a kind of informal, easygoing guy who's on the beach. And he's kind of framed and understood. He's him becoming Prime Minister is kind of understood as a symbol of changing times. This is a move from the conservative post-war years of the 50s and early 60s to a more vibrant, kind of swinging 60s modern sensibility. And I think TV in Australia is really part of this story. So in the late 50s, only about 10% of residents in Melbourne and Sydney have televisions. And by 1965, that number's around 80%.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's an incredible increase in the number of people consuming and engaging with their world through a television set. And Harry and Zara are seen on screens. The other thing that I did in researching this episode, which I think probably was the most fun I had in doing so, was I decided that rather than, looking only through the newspapers, the political commentariat and the formal political biographies, I went and looked at how he was represented in Australian Women's Weekly.
Oh, very nice.
Right.
Can I also say this is a period where women are largely voting Conservative too, aren't they?
Yep.
Like they're not yet voting for Labor. So,
no.
So tell me.
Yeah, and what's really significant here is that Harry's prime ministership isn't just about Harold Holt for the Australian Women's Weekly. It's about Harold and Zara.
Oh, interesting. Sure.
Right.
Okay. Huh.
So it's about both of them moving to the lodge. It's about both of them moving into this position, and there's as much coverage of her and as much coverage of them as a kind of power couple, a couple of admiration, of modernisation, of intimacy and informality, in contrast to stuffy Menzies.
And I find that contrast between Holt and Menzies really interesting, I guess, as well, because unlike Menzies, who would not budge on the white Australia policy, right? In spite of the fact that you do have this middle-class elite and you have this international arena increasingly condemning it, and you see that with the expulsion of South Africa, right, from the Commonwealth. Menzies isn't budging, but from what I understand about it, Harold Holt does.
Yeah, and this is a very kind of contested question amongst historians, because historians of the left don't want to give Holt any credit for dismantling the White Australia policy. They want to make that Gough and Earl Grasby.
Sure.
And historians of the Liberal Party want to say it wasn't Gough, it was actually Holt. Right. He's also much more sympathetic to compassionate grounds exceptions as
refugees.
As minister or individual cases. So as PM, he does pursue a couple of really important changes to the White Australia policy. One of them is that he opens the door to non-European immigration, but those cases are to be determined on a kind of case-by-case basis. So there's no formal exception kind of in place.
What's the criteria that he uses? Do you know?
They can't be competing for white jobs.
Interesting.
Essentially.
Interesting.
Right?
Sure.
So it's about, it's about...
Still that union kind of...
Yep.
Absolutely.
And one of the, I think, interesting things that he does is he irons out some of the differences in policy settings for migrants who are already here, evening out who can and can't access permanent residency. So there's uneven wait times, depending on essentially how white you are, between 5 and 15 years. And he basically evens those out and says, if you are here legitimately, you can apply for permanent residency after 5 years.
Interesting. So how much of this is about Harold Holt as a person, as a humanitarian, who is looking at these cases of refugees and concerned about them, and how much is it, on the contrary, about a bureaucratic standardisation of immigration policy?
Yeah,
What do
I
you
think it's the latter.
Yeah,
I don't think he's an ideologue. I don't think, he's a... In one
great
sense,
humanitarian.
No. You can make a humanitarian case to Holt on an individual, but not a collective kind of basis. And he is a pragmatist, and
sure,
and a liberal.
The world is changing anyway, so he's just
so we need to change a little bit too. Look, the other thing I think that's worth pointing to is his kind of thorough engagement while PM in that first year as PM with Southeast Asian political leaders. So he visits more countries than any other Prime Minister in Australian history up until that point. He really increases foreign policy engagement. Interesting.
So we're starting to shift more towards America and towards Asia. And I guess you see that with the ANZUS Treaty as well.
Yeah. And even Gough Whitlam says later, Holt did more to encourage Australia's engagement with Asia than any Prime Minister of the 20th century.
Although, to be honest as well, it wouldn't be hard.
It's a low bar.
I mean, British, Menzies was so
it's a low bar.
to the bootstraps.
Yeah.
Such an Anglophile.
Yeah, remembering he's a bit of a pragmatist. Let's
credit.
not turning him into this, because actually, the turn away from Britain, which is happening in part because Britain's turning away from Australia.
They're turning to Europe, right?
Yeah, and they're pulling out of Malaysia.
Yeah.
And when Britain makes that decision, Holt tries to argue against it. He tries to convince the Brits to stay in Malaysia, to stay engaged in the region. So he's still committed to the kind of, in one sense, close relationship with Britain, but Britain's not as committed to the close relationship with Australia. And so he has to go looking for new friends.
Yeah.
And he's not making new friends in South Asia. He's making new friends with America.
Okay, so tell us about LBJ. 'Cause
Yes.
that's how I know Holt, is that all the way with LBJ. Tell me about
it's
that.
actually, in one sense, it's a kind of apocryphal sentence, because that sentence is muttered when he's kind of in the throes of a bromance with LBJ. He's visiting, they're engaging on foreign policy questions, on questions around Vietnam, and his response to a question around Australia's support for US engagement in Vietnam is, we're all the way with LBJ. And actually, I read that and think about what it's like to be in the throes of a bromance of a new friend who adores you, and they sort of understood each other. They had a similar politics.
Yeah.
I can kind of see how you'd end up saying something a bit silly.
Yeah, absolutely. Throwaway line. And also, I guess, again, that wider context is he's a people pleaser, and he knows at this stage still that most of Australia is supportive of the Vietnam War.
Yep.
It's still a minority of fringe radicals who go, ugh, what is that civility? Who are repulsed by it.
Yeah, and he comes home and, people are kind of taking the mickey out of him for saying it. And he does regret it.
Right, interesting.
But he doesn't regret the policy. He thinks continued support for the US in Vietnam is a bit of a no-brainer. And he's not alone. So there's an election at the end of 1966. So this is a year into his prime ministership. And one of the central issues differentiating the ALP and Holt's government is the question of Vietnam and the question of the use of ballot to conscript young men into the army. Holt produces a pretty stunning electoral victory. Right. So, obviously elections aren't about just one thing.
Yeah.
But that election is a pretty good barometer of how deep support is amongst many Australians for a continued involvement in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the change in that attitude, which happens quite quickly in 1967, that causes him quite a few problems, I think.
What are the other reforms? What about the 67 referendum that you mentioned earlier in the podcast? Tell me about that.
67 is an incredibly momentous year in Australian history.
Yeah.
And it's the year when over 90% of Australian voters vote yes in a referendum, which essentially will mean Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people will be counted in the census, and that the Commonwealth will be able to make laws about them.
Sure.
I'm going to defer a little bit to you as my legal historical friend. Let's be honest, you know this history a little bit better than I do. But, those constitutional changes are actually quite small.
Yeah.
They don't do a great deal in terms of substantive changes to the lives of First Nations Australians. But they are understood at the time to be quite large.
If you look at the reality of it in terms of actual practical changes, you go, what it did was allowed for the Commonwealth now to make laws around Indigenous people, which did not improve their condition, but simply led to a shifting of responsibility from the states to the Commonwealth back to the states.
Yep.
If anything, it actually, in some ways, made things worse. As for, it really did, and I think as far as counting them in the census, Menzies' original idea of that was actually assimilationist.
Yeah.
This is not about Aboriginal autonomy. The interesting part is that the representation of it is actually quite different, and we have to separate the legal realities, I think, from the cultural transformations that it ushered in and that it signified. So tell me about those.
Yeah, so it meant a lot in terms of how, that 90% number is really significant.
Yep.
And the campaign leading up to this referendum didn't say this is for some minor tweaks in the Constitution.
Yeah.
This is about whether or not
Aboriginal
and Torres Strait Islanders are part of the Australian nation.
Interesting.
This is about whether an Indigenous child and a white child
Yeah.
have the same value.
Yeah.
And so it was framed around equality. It was framed around membership in the national
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
And this was a ringing endorsement of that question, right? So First Nations constitutional legal scholar Megan Davis, she writes, even though Aboriginal people were legally entitled to vote in federal elections before the referendum, it was only after the referendum that many felt able and willing to exercise that right.
Wow.
Although the vote did not establish Aboriginal peoples as Australian citizens, as they already possessed that legal status, it did mean that many saw themselves in this way for the first time. And they were treated by more members of the community as if they possessed such rights.
Wow.
I think that's a really nice way
Absolutely.
of, it's a really kind of very nuanced historical reading.
God, such an interesting moment, I think, in Australian history. But what's Holt's role in it? Like, what's he doing, you know?
I think figurehead is probably the most generous way of possibly reading his involvement.
God. Wow. It sounds like a bit of a PR campaign in some ways internationally as well. It just is saying, you know, that we're towing the line.
So, you know, 1967 would actually prove to be much rockier for him than this kind of great beginning in 66. Australian involvement in Vietnam and opposition to it is starting to grow.
Right.
He's starting to face increasingly large protests. There's a really funny moment in a protest in Perth where, you know, students and other rebel-rousers kind of force him to escape, running to a taxi. His press secretary has to jump in the window because the doors are shut against the student rebel-rousers. You know, the tides are shifting. I know, it's great. It's really wonderful. But it's in the context of this growing opposition that Holt actually agrees to supply more material and human support for US involvement in Vietnam, even though Treasury says to him, this is not a good use of money, and Defence says to him, this is going to make no material difference to the actual war itself. Gets to the end of the year, gets towards the end of 67, lots of people are noticing that he's lost that youthful spring in his step. There's reports of him looking hollow-faced and tired. And there's even reportage in overseas press that he's had a secret heart attack and not told anyone.
Oh, God.
So,
wow.
Yeah, it's really funny. And there's murmurs of a leadership challenge, right? So he heads down at the end of 67 to his holiday house in Victoria's Mornington Peninsula for what he was hoping, I think, would be a reinvigorating weekend. It obviously had rather different consequences. He leaves Zara behind in Canberra and instead takes along his neighbour and lover, Marjorie Gillespie.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, Frank Bongiorno, I read his chapter on Holt, and he says he has multiple mistresses. Like, is Zara aware of these? Is this a 1960s ethical, non-monogamous relationship, or is this betrayal, deceit, and treachery?
Look, let's come back to that question and decide. But Marjorie is certainly not the first, you know. So and it's kind of well known privately that Harold Holt is having these affairs, and Zara knows about them. So he goes down with Marjorie, and the group, which is Marjorie and her daughter and a few friends, they all head off to Cheviot Beach, where Holt engages, where Holt goes on that fateful solo swim. The others are put off by the choppy conditions. Holt's enjoying his swim and without realising he's getting gradually taken further out to sea. The classic Australian story. Doesn't realise. By the time Marjorie realises how far out he is, she starts to wave at him to swim back. He can't hear her saying, come back, come back, come back. And he then just disappears underneath the waves. The group calls for help and a major search begins. Marjorie's quickly sort of disappeared off the beach.
Oh, really?
To ensure that she won't be part of the press or the scene.
Oh, my God.
Trying to, hushing up that she's there.
Sure.
Zara and the rest of the family come down soon after. Nearly 200 people are searching for Holt within 24 hours. But on December 22nd, so that's about 5 days later, there's a memorial service for Holt in Melbourne with 2,000 official guests, including his bromance partner LBJ, who's come over for the funeral.
Right.
And it's, it's broadcast on television, and there's loudspeakers outside. It's a big deal. The Prime Minister's died, and kind of everyone's engaged. It's actually only the search is called off on the 5th of January. His body's never found. Experts agree basically that he's entered the water and as the tide was turning and been pulled out. Cheviot Beach has really crazy currents, and a few people had disappeared there before Holt. So it's actually not it's not surprising that someone would run into trouble.
Sure.
But it's actually only in September 2005 that the Victorian State Coroner finds that Holt had drowned, delivers a finding, and that's because coroners had previously been unable to investigate deaths where a body had never been found.
You mentioned that Holt's disappearance, and I know this myself, obviously led to a bunch of weird and wacky conspiracy theories. Walk me through some.
Okay, there's some pretty fun ones, and they actually get more weird and wacky as the years unfold.
Right.
So the first one is simply a shark attack rather than drowning. That's, the first conspiracy, I guess, or theory of his death that's not simply that he was a bit of a Dumbo who went for a swim when he shouldn't, was, he was attacked by a shark.
Can I just say quickly there, they did actually go around and kill sharks and open up their stomachs
looking for
to see whether he was inside.
I've heard that story before as well.
Yeah, I looked it up. It's true.
Yeah.
They did.
There's morphine he was taking for his shoulder, which impaired his judgment and also physical capacity. So you can see here the beginning theories are theories about this can't be explained by stupidity alone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But then the theory develops that it's actually a CIA assassination attempt.
Interesting. Do you know when that theory develops?
Yeah, I actually couldn't figure out when it starts to take, because
Yeah.
conspiracy theories emerge in private, right?
I know.
So this is a history of gossip, really.
I love it. But I also wonder whether it's pre or after Watergate.
Yeah,
it's that.
it must be after.
Yeah.
So the CIA assassination theory is the idea that he was about to withdraw Australian troops from Vietnam. So it's actually the same one as the JFK assassination attempt when you think about it, or not attempt, but successful one. But the big theory is that he was abducted by a Russian or Chinese, most likely Chinese, submarine, and kind of squirreled away.
I love the inflated significance that people give to Australia.
Yeah, I
in
know.
These theories as well.
I love China cared that much.
The Russians and the Chinese care.
Well, this is given further weight by actually a book in 1983 by Anthony Gray.
Right.
The Prime Minister was a spy, which suggests Holt has the whole time been a secret agent for China, and this was him being squirreled back to China before he got found out. So, look, the theories are fun.
So much more interesting.
So bananas.
Yeah.
So clearly not true.
Correct.
Right? So clearly not true.
Yeah. I wonder whether there is a masculinities element to that as well.
Like a refusal to accept that this had simply been Harold Holt making a bad decision because of his character.
Yeah, and that masculinist norms that are predicated upon notions of physical, prowess and virility actually have really perilous consequences.
Yep. But I actually, there's historians and theorists of conspiracy theories. They suggest that conspiracy theories emerge when people don't have faith in institutions.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's
And we
always
know
the-
that
yeah,
there's a kind of relationship between those two. And there is something to be said about the fact that these conspiracy theories gain more weight over time as Australians' faith in institutions declines. So
leading to where we are today.
Yeah, right.
And what about Zara?
So, one reading would be to turn her into his long-suffering wife.
Yeah.
She actually says in 1985 in a documentary, he was a womanizer. He loved them. He was a menace. Anyway, I loved him. I had to make up my mind about that very early in the marriage, and I decided, all right, if that's it, I'll look the other way, which I did. Who knows what conversations they had about their relationship and arrangements. Remember, their beginnings are quite sketchy, according to 1950s values.
Yeah.
And she bore Harry's children while married to someone else.
Oh, goodness. I mean, I think that we are inclined to want to rescue agency in these moments, that in order to give her a fully fleshed out kind of personality and persona, that we need to give her will and that we need to give her autonomy. And in that context, we then reach for explanations like she must have consented to it. They must have had these conversations. And it's quite possible that that's the case. I think it is also quite possible that that's not the case and that long-suffering sounds like a cliche, but I think that there is real pain that comes from these things and terrible behaviour on the part of men, and I cannot help but relate it to male entitlement and to the feminist critique that came out in the 1970s of the 1960s sexual revolution, where they went, it was a sexual revolution for men, not for women. And you know what? We're done.
And also, their power relationship probably changed over time.
Yeah.
Like, so the relationship between them, he becomes prime minister. He becomes the most powerful man in the country.
You're right, Lee.
So,
Absolutely,
maybe certain kinds of negotiations that were possible for them in 1955, they could have changed over time.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't stable.
Okay. So, summing it all up, how should Holt be remembered, Leigh? Was he a moderniser?
His prime ministership modernised Australia in a variety of ways. Whether or not he was the propelling agent of that modernisation, I remain a little sceptical about. And in fact, I think he didn't quite have the skills to manage that transition. I think he was a pragmatist rather than an ideologue. He wanted to people please. He wanted people to like him, whether that's Marjorie on the beach or by not causing big political fights where people will hate him.
Oh, very nice.
And I think that meant that he didn't take strong positions. And what Australia probably needed in 1967 was someone who had a bit of gumption. I just will say one thing, though. He doesn't get credit for this often enough, which is he saves a chunk of rainforest in Queensland. Johnny Buss discovers the army's going to requisition a big chunk of rainforest to test chemical weapons. Gets Harry on the phone, and Harry intervenes to save the rainforest. So, there is an environmental kind of element to his story, that time at Bingle Bay, which I think people don't know about.
That's good. Could have been there during the atomic testing as well.
Yeah.
In the Montebello Islands. But anyway.
Yeah, well, I don't think he had a home there.
Yeah. That's
so,
true. Oh, yeah.
But his attitude to big change, which is to do it quietly and not cause a fuss, it doesn't address the national mood that was taking shape at the end of the 1960s.
I feel like we need to advertise a Gough Whitlam, biopic now too.
And here comes Gough.
Yeah, exactly. Final question, Leigh. Biopic tagline.
I've got a few. I've had a lot of fun with this one.
Great.
Charm can only get you so far.
Ooh.
Pretty privilege, it'll get you in the end.
I love that one.
Or don't believe your own hype.
Oh, nice.